The Great Stone Station was a world of its own, a cavernous space where the air always held the faint, metallic taste of coal smoke and the distant, echoing sighs of steam. High above, the sun struggled to pour through the soot-streaked glass of the arched windows, casting long, weak beams that did little to push back the deep shadows gathered in the corners. It was a place of constant motion and sound, a symphony of hissing engines, the clatter of trunks being unloaded, and the murmur of 100 hurried conversations that rose and fell like the tide. People flowed in busy streams towards their platforms, their faces alight with purpose, their steps quick and certain. They knew where they were going. On a cold stone bench, set apart from the main current of travelers, a young woman named Anya did not move. She was a still point in the whirl of activity, a figure of such quiet patience that she might have been mistaken for a statue were it not for the gentle rise and fall of her shoulders with each breath. She was wrapped in a coat of faded blue wool, a garment that had once been fine but was now worn soft at the cuffs and thin at the elbows. On her lap rested a single, small carpet bag, its leather straps fastened with care. Her hands, clad in fingerless gloves, were folded over it, not clutching it tightly, but simply holding it as if it were the only anchor she had left in the world. 3 days ago, she had arrived on the morning train, her heart beating a hopeful rhythm that matched the chugging of the wheels. She had stepped onto this very platform, her eyes scanning the crowd for one face, one smile that belonged to her future. He had promised. He had written the words himself in a letter now tucked away in her bag, the ink slightly smudged from being read so many times. "I will meet you," he had said. "We will begin our life together." She had sold the few things she owned, said her goodbyes, and traveled through the night, sustained by the vision of that reunion. But the face had not appeared. The smile had not broken through the crowd. The first hour had been filled with the simple belief that he was merely late. The second hour had introduced a thin, cold thread of worry. By the time the sun had set on that first day, the worry had solidified into a heavy, leaden weight in her stomach. She had watched the platform empty, the last train depart, and the station grow quiet and hollow. The station master, an old man with a kind face etched with lines of concern, had approached her. "Miss," he'd said gently, "the last train is gone. Are you waiting for someone?" She had only been able to nod, her voice trapped somewhere deep inside her. He had not pressed her, but had instead brought her a cup of weak, sweet tea. "The night air is cold," was all he said, and he had allowed her to stay. Now, on the third day, the routine was a familiar, painful dance. Each time a train whistle screamed in the distance, her head would lift a fraction of an inch. Each time a new engine chuffed into the station, billowing steam and possibility, her heart would give a frail, treacherous leap. She would watch the doors open, her eyes desperately searching the alighting passengers for a familiar set of shoulders, a known way of walking. And each time, as the crowd dispersed and moved on, leaving behind nothing but scraps of paper and the scent of travel, the hope would drain from her, leaving her emptier than before. She was a vase waiting for flowers that would never come. The world outside the station was vast and unknown to her, a map without a destination. This cold stone bench had become her entire universe, its boundaries defined by the limits of her sight from this one fixed point. She had nowhere else to go, and so she waited, a solitary figure in a blue coat, her patience a silent testament to a love that had promised everything and delivered only this endless, echoing wait. The rhythm of the station, once a chaotic and overwhelming force, had slowly carved its patterns into Anya's weary consciousness, becoming a bleak and monotonous backdrop to her vigil. She had learned to distinguish the deep, throaty bellow of the express trains from the lighter, quicker puff of the local commuter lines. She knew the schedules by heart, could feel in her bones the approaching tremor of the 11:17 from the north, could anticipate the frantic scurrying that preceded the departure of the 2:08 for the coastal towns. Her world had shrunk to the grain of the wood on the bench beneath her, the chill of the stone floor through her thin soles, and the perpetual, gnawing emptiness of waiting. The initial sharp sting of disappointment had faded into a dull, constant ache, a hollow feeling that the station's weak tea and the kind master's sympathetic glances could not begin to fill. She was a ghost in her own life, watching the vibrant, purposeful world move around her, utterly separate from its currents. It was on the third afternoon, as a particularly gloomy dusk began to seep into the vast hall, that a new, small pattern introduced itself into her narrowed existence. A man and a child arrived, not from a train, but from the town side of the station, stepping through the great arched doorway into the smoky light. The man was tall and lean, his shoulders slightly stooped as if under a weight only he could feel. His clothes were neat but plain, the fabric worn soft with age and use. His face was serious, etched with a quiet gravity that seemed to push all sound away from him, creating a pocket of silence in the bustling air. He carried a wooden toolbox that looked well-used and respected, its surface nicked and stained with oil. This was Leo, the town's clockmaker, come to tend to the station's great timepiece, a magnificent clock of brass and glass that presided over the concourse with a stately, implacable rhythm. And beside him, a small, sturdy shadow, was his daughter, Maya. She was a little thing, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, bundled in a practical brown coat and a scarf that threatened to swallow her whole. On her feet were a pair of scuffed but determined little boots that clacked purposefully against the stone floor. While her father conferred with the station master and then set up his ladder to begin his work on the intricate gears behind the clock face, the little girl did not fidget or complain. She had been here before. This was her father's world, and she knew its rules. She found a spot near the base of the ladder where she was out of the way but could still see him, and she sat on her own small carpet bag, a miniature of Anya's, her hands folded in her lap in a perfect imitation of adult patience. But a child's patience, while deep, is also curious. Her large, bright eyes, the color of dark honey, soon strayed from her father's work. They scanned the crowds, noted the crying baby, the laughing sweethearts, the impatient businessman consulting his pocket watch. And then they found Anya. To Maya, the woman on the bench was not a ghost but a puzzle. While everyone else in the station was moving towards something, this lady was a statue of waiting. She was always there, in the same blue coat, her posture never slumping into sleep, her gaze never truly leaving the platform where the train sighed to a stop. She was as permanent a feature as the benches or the ticket counter, yet there was a sadness about her that even a child could perceive, a loneliness that stood in stark contrast to the crowded hall. For a long time, Maya simply watched. She saw the station master bring the lady a cup of tea and a small roll. She saw the lady accept it with a quiet smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She saw how the lady's hands would tighten just a little on her bag every time a train arrived, and then slowly relax as hope once again drained away. It was a silent drama played out in the smallest of gestures, and Maya, from her perch by the ladder, was its sole and attentive audience. A deep, childish empathy stirred within her. Without a word to her father, who was absorbed in the delicate machinery of time, she stood up. She walked over to her own bag, rummaged inside, and pulled out a small linen napkin. Untying it, she revealed 2 oatmeal biscuits, their rough tops sprinkled with a few precious grains of sugar. They were her afternoon snack, carefully saved. Holding one biscuit in her small hand, she walked across the short expanse of cold stone floor that separated their 2 worlds. She stopped in front of the bench, her boots planted firmly, and simply looked up at Anya. There was no shyness in her gaze, only a frank and open curiosity mixed with a desire to help. She extended her hand, offering the biscuit. It was not a grand gesture, but in the stark economy of the station, where Anya had nothing, it was a king's ransom. It was an offer of friendship, of shared provisions, from one who had so little to another who had even less. It was the first kind hand extended without pity, but with simple, unadorned compassion, and it cut through Anya's isolation more sharply than any words of comfort could have done. The simple offering of the biscuit became a fragile bridge thrown across the void of Anya's solitude, and across this bridge, a tentative connection began to form. Each afternoon, as the weak sun began its slow descent behind the soot-grimed glass of the station roof, the little girl in the scuffed boots would make her pilgrimage to the bench. She no longer brought just biscuits, but instead carried with her the unself-conscious treasures of her childhood, a smooth, gray river stone she deemed particularly perfect, a feather from a sparrow, a little wooden doll with a kind, painted face. She would present these items to Anya not as gifts, but as topics of conversation, as keys to unlock the silent world the woman inhabited. She would climb up onto the cold stone beside her, her small feet dangling well above the floor, and in a voice that was clear and soft as a bell, she would tell Anya about her day, about the cat that lived in the alley behind their shop, about the sound the rain made on their tin roof. Anya, whose voice had grown rusty from disuse, found herself listening, truly listening, for the first time in days. The endless, circular track of her own thoughts. Where was he? Why had he not come? What was she to do? Was gently but firmly derailed by the straightforward narrative of this child's life. She learned that the little girl's name was Maya and that her father's name was Leo. She learned that he could fix anything with gears or springs, that his hands were always clean despite the oil he worked with, and that he could make a music box play a tune so sad and beautiful it could make you cry. Maya's words painted a picture of a quiet, ordered existence centered around the small clockmaker's shop, a picture of two lives moving in careful, synchronized orbit around a central absence. It was during one of these quiet confidences, as Maya carefully arranged her doll's dress, that she first spoke of the silence that lay at the heart of their home. "My mama is in the stars," she stated, her tone matter-of-fact, devoid of the piercing grief an adult would bring to such a statement. She looked up at the high, vaulted ceiling of the station, as if she could see straight through the stone and glass to the twilight sky beyond. "Papa says she watches over us, and that she sends us love on the beams of the moon. But I think the moonbeams must get lost sometimes." She sighed a small, world-weary sigh that seemed too large for her tiny frame. "Papa is very sad. He works and works. The clocks all tell the right time, but he has forgotten how to smile. His smiles are all broken, like a watch that won't tick." In her childish logic, she had diagnosed the problem with perfect accuracy. Her father's heart was a mechanism he could not repair, a mainspring wound too tight and on the verge of snapping. Anya looked at this small creature who carried such a profound understanding of her father's grief, and her own heart, which had felt so shriveled and cold, gave a painful, thawing ache. She saw not just a child, but a fellow guardian of a silent sorrow. They were two sentinels, one old in grief, one young, both keeping watch over a love that had been lost, one to the stars, the other to a broken promise. The shared space on the bench became sacred ground, a temporary shelter where two lonely souls could simply be, without the need for explanation or pretense. The following day, Leo finished his work on the great clock sooner than expected. The final, satisfying click of the mechanism settling back into its perfect rhythm echoed faintly. He packed his tools with methodical care, his movements economical and precise. He wiped his hands on a clean rag and looked down for his daughter, expecting to find her by the ladder. Instead, he saw her sitting on the bench beside the woman in the blue coat, the two of them looking at a picture book Maya had pulled from her bag. The sight gave him a momentary pause, a flicker of something unfamiliar, not concern, but a faint curiosity at the quiet companionship between them. He walked over, his footsteps measured on the stone. "Maya," he said, his voice low and gentle. "It is time to go home." Maya looked up at her father, then at Anya, whose face was once again settling into its mask of patient waiting now that the distraction was ending. A look of fierce determination crossed the child's features. The solution to both their problems, so obvious and elegant in her mind, could wait no longer. She slid down from the bench, her boots making a solid clack as she landed. She turned to face Anya directly, her small hands balled into fists at her sides, her chin lifted with a courage that dwarfed her size. She took a deep breath, her serious eyes fixed on the lonely woman. The words, when they came, were not a question born of childish fancy, but a proposal of profound simplicity, an offer of a new world built from the pieces of their broken ones. "You are kind," she stated, her voice clear and carrying in the vast space. "And you're here. He is not coming. We are here."
My papa is sad.
"I am sad. You are sad." She laid out the facts as she saw them. "Will you marry my daddy instead? Then you wouldn't have to be alone. And neither would we." The question hung in the air, a bubble of pure, unadulterated innocence, so audacious and so heartfelt that it seemed to stop the very dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. It was a child's attempt to mend the universe, one broken heart at a time. For a moment, the entire vast station seemed to hold its breath. The hiss of a distant engine faded into nothingness, the murmur of the crowd dissolved into a dull hum at the edges of perception, and even the great clock overhead appeared to pause in its eternal ticking. The air itself grew still and heavy around the three figures frozen in their tableau of profound awkwardness. Anya's face, pale from days of waiting, now flushed with a wave of heat so intense she felt dizzy. Her hands, which had been resting calmly on her bag, flew to her cheeks as if to cool the sudden fire there. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The child's question had struck her with the force of a physical blow, knocking the very air from her lungs and leaving her mind a perfect, blank white. It was so utterly unexpected, so bizarrely practical, and yet so deeply touching in its innocence, that it existed entirely outside the realm of any response she could possibly formulate. Leo, the clockmaker, experienced a reaction of a different, more horrified nature. A deep, crimson flush crept up his neck and suffused his own solemn face. The careful composure that was his armor, the quiet dignity he maintained even in his deepest grief, shattered into 1,000 pieces. His tools, usually an extension of his steady hands, felt suddenly clumsy and foreign. "Maya," he exclaimed, his voice a strangled mixture of shock, profound embarrassment, and sharp reprimand. The word echoed more loudly than he intended in the hushed space around them. He stepped forward quickly, his movements uncharacteristically jerky, and placed a firm hand on his daughter's shoulder, not in anger, but in a desperate attempt to pull her back from the social abyss into which she had just leaped. He could feel the stares of nearby passengers, their curiosity a palpable, prickling sensation on his skin. He turned his gaze from his bewildered daughter to the woman on the bench. He saw not a stranger, but a person whose own world had clearly just been upended. He saw the shock in her wide eyes, the trembling of her lower lip, the way her slender frame seemed to shrink into the worn blue fabric of her coat. His own embarrassment began to be tempered by a swift, surging wave of compassion. This woman was clearly in a state of profound vulnerability, stranded and abandoned, and his daughter had just subjected her to the most personal and startling of propositions. I must apologize," he began, his voice low and rushed, struggling to find a register that was neither too harsh for the situation nor too soft to convey the depth of his regret. "My daughter, she speaks without, she does not understand," he floundered, the precise man of gears and pendulums utterly lost in the messy, unpredictable mechanics of human emotion. "Please, you must forgive her. She is a child, and her heart, it sometimes leads her mouth where it should not go." Anya, finally managing to draw a shaky breath, looked from the mortified man to the earnest, uncomprehending child. Maya's face was beginning to cloud with confusion. She had offered a perfect solution and was being met not with gratitude, but with dismay. Seeing the child's budding distress did what nothing else could. It broke through Anya's own shock. She found her voice, though it was thin and unsteady. "There is nothing to forgive," she said, and the words, meant to comfort the father, surprised her with their truth. She looked directly at Leo, her gaze clearing. It was a very kind thought. And it was. In its breathtaking simplicity, it was the purest offer of kindness she had received in 3 long days. Leo, seeing the genuine lack of offense in her eyes, felt his own panic begin to recede, leaving behind the raw edges of his shame and a dawning, deeper understanding of her plight. The station master had mentioned a woman waiting for days, but Leo, wrapped in his own shroud of sorrow, had paid little mind. Now he saw her properly. The single, small bag that contained her entire life, the weariness in her posture that spoke of nights spent on this hard bench, the dignity with which she bore her obvious desertion. His professional eye, trained to assess broken things, saw not a problem to be solved, but a person in desperate need of a moment's peace, a gesture of humanity that asked for nothing in return. The silence stretched again, but this time it was less charged, more contemplative. He made a decision, not as a potential suitor, the very idea was absurd, but simply as a man who could not, in good conscience, walk away. "It is getting late," he said, his voice returning to its natural, quiet timbre. "And the evening chill is settling in the stone." He gestured vaguely toward the large doors leading out to the town. "My home it is just above my shop. It is warm. We were about to have our supper." He paused, choosing his next words with immense care, wanting to offer shelter without implying any expectation, to extend kindness without pressure. "It would be no trouble, that is, you would be welcome to join us. For a meal. It is not much, but it is hot." It was an offer made from one wounded heart to another, a simple sharing of bread and warmth, a temporary harbor from the cold, indifferent world of the station. It was an apology, an act of pity, and the first step on a new path, all contained within a single, hesitant invitation. The walk from the station to the clockmaker's shop was a short one through cobbled streets already deep in evening shadow, but for Anya, it felt like a journey between worlds. The air outside was sharp and clean, scented with wood smoke and the damp earth of nearby gardens, a stark contrast to the station's constant taste of coal and oil. She walked a few paces behind Leo, who carried a now sleepy Maya in his arms, her head nestled trustingly against his shoulder. Anya's own small bag felt heavier than ever, a tangible weight of her past life, yet her steps, for the first time in days, had a destination. She was not following him, precisely, but moving parallel to him, two solitary orbits drawn into a temporary, uncertain alignment by the gravity of a child's wish. The shop was nestled between a baker's and a bookbinder's, its front window dark but for the soft glow of a single lamp left burning within. Leo unlocked the door, and a sweet, complex scent washed over them, the smell of old wood, lemon oil, metal polish, and the faint, dry fragrance of time itself. Inside, it was a cave of wonders. Dozens of clocks covered every surface and filled the walls, their faces pale in the dim light like a gathering of silent, round moons. Grandfather clocks stood like solemn sentinels in the corners, their pendulums stilled. Shelf upon shelf held carriage clocks, mantel clocks, and delicate porcelain beauties, all waiting for the master's touch. The air was thick with a potential symphony of ticks and chimes, now hushed in the peace of the evening. A narrow staircase led up to their living quarters, and as Leo carried Maya up to her small bed under the eaves, Anya waited below, enveloped by the quiet company of all these halted moments. The room above was small, orderly, and warm from a well-tended stove. It was a place where function outweighed decoration, yet it was not without beauty. The beauty was in the well-scrubbed wooden table, in the gleam of copper pots hanging by the fireplace, in the precise stack of firewood beside the hearth. It was the beauty of care, not of adornment. Leo, having settled Maya, moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of long habit. He reheated a simple stew from the hearth, cut thick slices of dark bread, and poured 2 cups of milk without any unnecessary ceremony. The meal was eaten in a silence that was not uncomfortable, but observant. They were 2 strangers, sharing a table, each hyper-aware of the other's presence, each navigating the strange newness of the situation with a cautious politeness. The following day, an unspoken agreement seemed to settle between them. Anya could not bring herself to return to the emptiness of the station bench, and Leo, perhaps sensing her utter lack of options, did not suggest it. Instead, a new rhythm began. While Leo descended to his shop to begin his day's work, Anya remained upstairs. She did not ask what she should do. She simply saw what needed doing. She found a basket of mending a shirt of Leo's with a torn cuff, a pinafore of Maya's with a missing button. She found a needle and thread in a drawer and set to work. Her hands, which had felt so useless for days, now had a purpose. The simple, repetitive motion of the needle pulling through fabric was a quiet anchor. Later, she carefully dusted the shelves in the living area, polished the table until it shone, and swept the hearth. She was not intruding. She was restoring order to a space that had been maintained but not nurtured. It was a quiet language of gratitude, her actions saying what her words could not. Thank you for the warmth. Thank you for the food. Thank you for not leaving me on the bench. Leo, coming up for a tool, would pause in the doorway and see her there, a calm, focused presence in his home, and a strange, unfamiliar feeling would stir in his chest. Not the sharp pain of grief, but something quieter, something like peace. In the afternoon, Maya, her confidant now, brought her a hairbrush and asked Anya to braid her hair. Sitting on a stool by the window, with the afternoon light painting gold on the floorboards, Anya gently worked through the child's tangles. She divided the hair into 3 sections and began to weave them together, her fingers remembering a skill long unused. She told Maya a simple story her own mother had told her about a little bird learning to fly. Leo, coming up the stairs to call them for a meal, stopped on the top step and simply watched. He saw his daughter's face, serene and trusting, tilted up toward the woman. He saw Anya's hands, gentle and capable, moving with a sure rhythm. He heard the soft murmur of her voice. And in that moment, the sight did not bring a pang of loss for what was gone, but a flicker of warmth for what was here. Now. They were not a family, not yet, perhaps not ever. But they were no longer 3 broken pieces. They were like 3 separate, silent clocks, and somehow, in the stillness of this warm room, their mechanisms had begun, tentatively, to tick in time. The tentative rhythm of their days stretched into a week, then 2, each sunrise weaving their separate lives more tightly into a shared pattern. The clockmaker's shop, once a place of silent, stopped time, became the steady heartbeat of their new existence. Anya's presence was no longer that of a guest, but had settled into the very grain of the woodwork, a quiet, sustaining force. She had learned the specific way Leo liked his tools arranged on his workbench, and she would sometimes straighten them when he was lost in the intricate soul of a timepiece. She discovered that Maya loved stories about clever animals, and the evening ritual of a tale by the fire became as fixed and expected as the chiming of the hours from the shop below. The house itself seemed to breathe easier, filled with the aroma of baking bread and the subtle scent of lavender that Anya tucked into the linens. For Leo, the change was as gradual and undeniable as the movement of a shadow across a sundial. The crushing weight of his solitude, a burden he had carried for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to stand upright without it, began, imperceptibly, to lighten. It was not that he forgot his lost love. Her memory was a cherished portrait in a locket, always close to his heart. But the present moment was no longer a bleak expanse to be endured. He found himself listening for the sound of Anya's footsteps on the stairs, not with anxiety, but with a simple awareness of her movement through their day. He noticed the way she hummed a soft, nameless tune while kneading dough, a sound that wove itself into the domestic symphony of the house. One evening, as he was repairing a tiny, jeweled music box for a wealthy client, he realized the melody he was fitting the pins to was the very same one Anya had been humming. The coincidence felt significant, a tiny gear clicking into perfect place. The true revelation came on an afternoon when Maya was napping. Leo was working at the kitchen table, sketching a design for a new clock face, his brow furrowed in concentration. Anya was sitting in the chair by the window, mending a hole in the knee of Maya's stocking. The silence between them was deep and comfortable, filled only with the scratch of his pencil and the whisper of her thread. She looked up from her work, her gaze soft and contemplative. "The music box for the little girl in the village," she began, her voice quiet so as not to break the peace of the room. "The one with the ballerina. Would it play better if the spring were wound to the left first, just a half turn, to loosen it? It seems to stick on the high notes." Leo looked up, astonished. It was a perceptive question, one that spoke of her having watched him not with a passive eye, but with a genuine, thoughtful interest in his craft. It was a question from a partner. That evening, after Maya was asleep, the house was wrapped in a profound quiet. Leo stood by the hearth, watching the flames dance. He could hear Anya moving about in the kitchen, washing the supper dishes. He thought of the past weeks of her patience, her gentle strength, the quiet light she had brought into their shadowed world. He thought of the empty bench at the station and the full chair by his window. He thought of his daughter, laughter, which had returned like birdsong after a long winter. The decision that formed in his mind was not sudden, but the final, smooth turn of a key that had been winding for a long time. He turned around. Anya was drying her hands on a linen towel, her back to him. She turned, sensing his movement, and saw the look on his face. It was not the look of the embarrassed, mortified man from the station. It was the face of a man who had carefully considered a mechanism and found its truth. His expression was solemn, but his eyes were clear and calm. "Anya," he said, and her name, in his quiet voice, sounded like a finished thought. He did not move toward her, respecting the space between them as something sacred. "This house, it was a shell before you came. We were just living in it, waiting for time to pass." He gestured vaguely around the warm, lit room. "You have not just filled it. You have made it a home again. You have given my daughter her joy back. You have given me," he paused, searching for the right word, the precise term. "You have given me peace." He took a slow, steady breath. "I am not a man of pretty words. I work with gears and springs because their logic is clear. But this, what I feel, is clear to me." He looked at her directly, his gaze unwavering. "I am not asking because my daughter proposed it. I am asking because my own heart has seconded the motion. Would you consider staying? Not as our guest. As my wife. As her mother." The question hung in the air, not as a shocking, childish exclamation, but as a solemn, adult offer. It was a proposal built not on passion, but on the solid, daily foundations of shared grief, mutual respect, and the slow, healing balm of kindness. It was an invitation to join his life not as a replacement, but as a new, essential component, a mainspring for their future. He was offering her the one thing she had lost all hope for on that cold station bench, a true and lasting beginning. The promise of spring, which had been a timid whisper in the air for weeks, finally blossomed into full, confident reality. The world outside the clockmaker's shop was washed in a gentle gold, and the sweet, green scent of new growth drifted through the open window, mingling with the familiar smells of oil and wood. On this particular morning, the shop was closed, a rare occurrence, but the day held a significance greater than any timepiece needing repair. The three of them, Leo, Anya, and Maya, her small hand held firmly in Anya's, walked the familiar route to the station not as solitary souls, but as a single unit, a constellation of 3 stars finally aligned. They were there to see off the station master's sister, who was embarking on a long-awaited journey, and the act of being at the station as a family, as those who were staying to wish well to those who were leaving, felt like the closing of a profound circle. The great stone hall was just as Anya remembered it, the hissing engines, the swirling steam, the echoing announcements, but she was no longer a part of its bleak furniture. She stood within the bustling activity, yet separate from its anxious energy, anchored by the warm, solid presence of Leo on one side and the trusting grip of Maya on the other. She watched a young woman, anxious and hopeful, clutch a single bag and scan the crowd, and her heart did not ache with a remembered pain, but swelled with a quiet empathy for the journey that young woman was beginning, whatever its outcome might be. She had not forgotten the desolation of the bench. She had incorporated it into her story, a necessary shadow that made the present light seem all the brighter. High above them, the great station clock, Leo's clock, began to chime the hour. Its sound was no longer a mocking measure of time lost, but a proud, clear bell marking a moment shared. Bong, bong, bong. The rich, brass notes rolled through the vast space, a sound of order, of certainty, of perfect, mechanical truth. Leo looked up at it, his professional eye checking its performance instinctively, but his heart feeling something deeper. That clock had measured the long, lonely hours of Anya's wait. It had marked the moment his daughter had asked her incredible question. It had ticked faithfully through the quiet evenings where healing had occurred in silent companionship. It was a witness to their story, its unwavering rhythm the backbone of their new beginning. Maya, impatient with stillness, tugged on Anya's hand and pointed toward the platform where the train was beginning to pull away, its wheels grinding against the iron tracks. "She's going to have such an adventure," Maya exclaimed, her eyes wide with the romance of it all. Leo looked down at Anya, and in his gray eyes, usually so reserved, she saw a reflection of the same profound gratitude and quiet joy that filled her own heart. No grand words were needed. A slight, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, and she answered it with one of her own. It was a language they had forged in the quiet of his workshop and the warmth of their kitchen, a dialect of understood glances and shared peace. They turned to leave, walking back through the grand archway into the sunlight, leaving the sound of the trains behind them. They stepped out of the world of departures and goodbyes and into the world of their own continuous, unfolding story. The station, with its echoes of past sorrow, was now simply a place they occasionally visited, a landmark in their lives, not a definition of them. They were going home to the shop full of ticking clocks, to the warm stove, to the small table where they shared their meals. They were a family, not fashioned from a single, unbroken history, but lovingly assembled from fragments of loss, patiently repaired with threads of compassion, and set in motion by the courageous, innocent heart of a child. Their lives were no longer defined by what had been taken from them, but by what they had built together. The mechanism of their shared heart, once stopped and broken, was now wound, synchronized, and ticking in perfect, harmonious time, a quiet, enduring music that would sound for all their days. If you found comfort in the story of Anya, Leo, and Maya, and wish to follow along as more tales of kindness and new beginnings are told, consider subscribing to stay connected with the journey.